Hello everyone and welcome to The Good Old Gamer, the channel where we cut through the marketing BS, take a look at new and old gaming technologies to figure out what makes the most sense for you. And making sense of Intel's new upcoming Rocket Lake CPUs is what we're going to be doing here today. So we got some information over at videocards.com, we'll go over that here in a minute, that Intel's new Rocket Lake 11900KF. Sorry, these are very difficult to remember, all these nomenclatures, but the 11900KF is running extremely hot. In fact, up to 98 degrees Celsius. Now, this isn't crazy. You can make any CPU run very hot. But apparently this was underwater, and a pretty large water cooler at that. So, 98C. Well, Intel had to make some trade-offs, and it looks like they decided, screw it, throw a ton of power at this thing, make them hot and loud, and see what happens. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. But first, in need of a Windows 10 key for your new PC build? Well, you're in luck. Today's sponsor is CDK Deals, and they have a deal for you. CDK Deals is a site that offers excellent deals on games and software. And of course, they offer Windows 10 Pro OEM keys at a ridiculously good price. Just find the best deal and go ahead and pop in my promo code GOG20 to apply an additional 20% off. You can check out securely via credit card or PayPal, and once done, you will go ahead and get direct access to your key via the website as well as in your email. Once you have your key, all you have to do is type in activate in your search bar, go ahead and pop the key in, and poof, you're up and running. To take advantage of this excellent offer, all you have to do is click the link in the description and pin comment down below. Make sure to apply GOG20 to get that additional 20% off. All right, so jumping on over here to videocards.com, we see Intel Core i9 11900KF heats up to 98C and pulls 250 watts. I actually think that this is an understatement, and we'll go over that here in a second. But man, 98 degrees Celsius. That's pretty hot. So, okay, this is according to a picture posted on ChipHell. We'll take a look at the picture here in a second of the upcoming Rocket Lake-S CPU. All right, so despite carrying a TDP of 125 watts, the CPU package power is reported at 250.83 watts. Now, this is, once again, like I said, this might be what it's reporting, but according to the cooling system that they were using, this seems highly suspect, in my opinion. This is in Intel's PL2 state, which is expected to be similar to Comet Lake S series up to 250 watts. So current CPUs technically are pulling the same amount of power according to these measurements, with a duration of 56 seconds. It's unclear whether the motherboard settings, blah, 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 blah. Nothing too crazy there. And we keep going into more of that stuff. All right, but here's where the important stuff comes in. All right, so it's believed that the 11900K series will have a base clock of 3.5 gigahertz, and the SKU's all-core boost will be 4.8 gigahertz. So that's basically what it's running at while hitting 98C. But here's the important part. This was done on an entry-level 360 AIO cooler. So this is a triple 120 fan AIO cooler, and it still hits 98C when running a full load. Now, this was done during an IDA64 stress FPU test, which is obviously going to push things to the max. So this is 100% pushing the CPU. But at the same time, you would expect a 360 millimeter AIO cooler to be able to handle something like that. So, all right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these pictures here. So blowing this up, it's really pretty blurry. So you can see like 11900KF. They kind of blurred out some of this stuff. I don't know why. You can see 1.4 volts. And considering we don't know whether they were messing with anything in the BIOS, I doubt it, to push up these frequencies to 4.8 gigahertz or 4.788. So we'll just round up to 4.8. Yeah, so Intel obviously needs a crap ton of power to get this CPU running at those speeds. So I remember in the long ago of 2017, when AMD launched their first generation Ryzen CPUs, I remember my comment section filled with, oh, Intel has so many advanced technologies just sitting on the back shelf. They could just bring them out and whip them out at any single time and just destroy AMD. Well, let's fast forward 4 years later. It's just about 4-year anniversary of that, by the way, which is crazy enough to think of. But Now we can see that that simply was not the case. In fact, Intel is having to backport their latest technologies from their laptop CPUs to even compete at this point in time. Now, if we're being honest, Intel actually has done very well considering they've been using the same technology forever at this point. They've been on 14 nanometer and they've been using Skylake architecture for about as far back as my brain feels like remembering at this point in time. So they've actually been doing all right. But AMD is now really pushing the envelope, their technological advances in both MCM and their TSMC 7nm process, to where Intel is now basically pushing a CPU that is going to draw more power than a Vega Liquid. That's right. So if we take this at face value, this article here, if they were using a 360mm all-in-one, remember Vega Liquid? This just used a single 120mm all-in-one cooler, and that ran at 300 watts TDP on the box, and with some tweaking and overclocking, was very easily hitting 400 watts of power. And that was able to keep the Vega Liquid cool and quiet. Now, we're hearing that a 360mm all-in-one cooler, albeit a entry-level model, so maybe the pump isn't the best, but still, this should be at least as good as the Vega Liquid 120mm, one would assume, and we're hitting 98C. Yes, I get it, this is under torture test and, max load, unrealistic conditions, but how unrealistic is it? If you really think about it, how many of you guys out there do any sort of media encoding? Like, do you use Handbrake? For example, I rip all my Blu-rays and DVDs and whatnot and encode them in X265, which takes hours and hours and hours to do, especially if I'm doing like a TV series. So my CPU is running 100% maxed out overnight. So this is not an unrealistic situation that somebody may be running across. And the fact that these CPUs are rated at running at only 250 watts, I call BS on that because of the Vega Liquid example. This CPU, assuming that this all-in-one's at least on par with that, has to be pulling somewhere closer to 400 watts of total power. Now, if we're being honest, who's this product for? That's probably going to be for the try-hard PCMR enthusiasts out there that whenever they see a 1 or 2% gain on a graph, they're going to go out and buy something because it's just that hair better. Those guys are also people that are likely running RTX 3090s. So if you take an RTX 3090, which will spike up around 800 watts of power, then you have a 400-ish watt CPU, you're talking about an enormous amount of power, a 1200 to 1500 watt PSU absolute minimum, and a top of the line one at that. So you're looking at what, $250 to $300 just for a power supply. Meanwhile, you have AMD over here going, well, our CPU is going to be what, 2 to 5% slower in certain workloads. So probably in games, I'm assuming that Rocket Lake might beat AMD by 2 to maybe 5%. That's my guess. And we know it's not breaching 10%. So just a small few percentage points. Meanwhile, you can cool that thing on air, no problem, and it's going to work just fine. So AMD is really flexing their technological advances at this point in time, and Intel's really showing their lack of technological advancement with this release. Now, assuming that this is true, once again, it's not like confirmed, but this does kind of tick the boxes that I was expecting from Rocket Lake. Going ahead and backporting, I knew that there was only two ways this was going to work. Either lower clock speeds, much lower clock speeds, or much higher power draw. And once we saw the clock speeds leak, it had to be higher power. But at no point in time did I ever think even the cheapest 360mm AIO on the planet would not be able to cool this thing. Now, according to the article, we don't know the exact specs. Was this overclocked, overvolted, or anything like that? But it leads me to believe that this was just during its normal boost period, because it did have the headroom to do that 56-second boost period. And that means that this is stock, essentially, at 4.8 gigahertz. That's going to be the stock all-core. So, yeah. So anybody looking at buying one of these things, you're talking about like the tippity top of the line rig, and you're going to be pumping out so much power, so much inefficiency, so much waste, that honestly, this thing will never ever make sense to me. Now, for the average person out there watching this going, okay, I don't care, I'm not going to be spending all this money on this thing anyway, but what about the cheaper parts? Well, if at 4.8 all core, we're drawing, let's say, like I said, I'm ballparking, probably somewhere around 400 watts of power, realistically, not what they tell you on your CPU-Z or whatever. That means the lower end SKUs that are rated up to, let's say, 65 or 95 watt TDP, that means that's the maximum that they can pull. Because AIBs and system integrators, they're going to use the cheapest coolers possible, and they have to work with basically stock coolers. That means clock speeds are going to be so much lower on these than probably even Comet Lake. Realistically, I could see a 65 watt Rocket Lake part losing to a 65 watt Comet Lake part at this point in time. So it's going to be pretty interesting how this all shakes out. But to me, it looks like AMD's advantage is just clear as day at this point in time. It's as obvious to anybody who's actually trying to look at it. But AMD are no saints themselves. They're not going to be coming out with non-X SKUs parts here anytime soon. So anybody looking for more reasonably priced Zen 3 CPUs, you're kind of out of luck. So you're going to be paying a premium for that at this point. And you'll have the Intel option, but it's going to cost you a fortune in power, better components like more expensive power supplies, and during the summer months, it might make your room uncomfortable, to be honest with you. So you're going to be paying for it one way or the other, even if the prices are competitive, but even leaked prices aren't that great. So where does that leave you, the average Joe, the average person, the blue-collar guy? What should you be buying in this market? To me, realistically, I'd be looking at an Intel 10700 non-K or 10700F or whatever, or a Ryzen 3700X if you can get them below $300. To me, that is the CPU for the average person, and that's not going to change by the introduction of Rocket Lake. I just don't see this moving the needle at all, and AMD there's no benefit for them to release the cheaper CPUs for you or I at this point in time. Imagine once they met their demand, let's say once they saturated the market with Zen 3, their current lineup, it would make more sense for them to take their current wafers that they're building for Zen 3 and putting them towards console or Radeon 6000 GPUs. Maybe they'll actually come out with a 6700 or 6600, 6500. Maybe we'll get more mainstream graphics cards at that point in time. So to me, I just don't see AMD seeing it in their best interest to go ahead and produce less expensive Zen 3 CPUs, especially since Intel really isn't competing. You're paying for it any which way you slice it. And that extra performance gain that they might have in gaming, it simply isn't ever going to be worth it. But that's just my opinion on the whole situation. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Are you going to be one of those tryhards? Are you like, 1 or 2%? That's totally worth 4 times the power consumption compared to a much more slender build, and it's worth that extra expense as well. You're willing to pay for that 1 or 2% and pay for it in pretty much every manageable way. Or are you going to be like, not so much? For me, the biggest disappointment here is the fact that they're using the Ice Lake cores, which don't have the great Tiger Lake iGPU. I was hoping that it would have the 96 EUs. It's only going to have 32 EUs on these new Rocket Lake CPUs. So to me, that really is just out the window. There's no iGPU performance here that's going to be really worth a damn. So that was a downside. And the fact that the clock speeds are obviously going to be much, much lower than people are anticipating. I would expect mid 3 gigahertz all core on 65 watt TDP parts. At this point in time, I mean, AMD, my 3700X, for example, it's 4.4 gigahertz stock pretty much at all times during all core. So yeah, it's just not the best spot ever for Intel. Now, I'm happy that they're trying, but due to the leaked prices and how hot these things are going to run, they're just not even competing at this point, in my opinion. Plain and simple, they're going to need their manufacturing process to advance. They need 7 nanometer, and they're going to need it by next year. If they don't have it by next year, I just don't see them ever being able to compete with AMD, because later this year, we're expecting 5 nanometer parts out of AMD. And if it takes Intel till 2023, their 7 nanometer is going to be competing against TSMC's 3 nanometer. So they're still going to be That's still a node behind. And yeah, technologically, they're just not able to keep up. But those are just my thoughts. We'll know more once these CPUs launch. And once again, I'm interested to hear you guys' thoughts. If you like videos like this, please smash that like button. Please subscribe. Please share with friends. YouTube is really suppressing smaller creators. So the best way you can help out is smashing the like button, commenting in the comment section below, hitting the notification bell, and subscribing to the channel. And I want to thank you all for your support. That's all I really have for you here today, and I will catch you guys in the next video.